In our previous two lectures, we were primarily trying to set the stage for the tale of the Hymn of the Pearl itself. Although, of course, it is available in many translations. As I said, one of the easiest one to get hold of is the one in Hans Jonas's book, The Gnostic Religion. I just noticed that this book has really been out for quite, has been published quite a long time ago, and I wasn't aware of that. Although I think it was first published in 1958, and it is one of the most workable, concise, scholarly works on Gnosticism, and has a pretty good translation of the Hymn of the Pearl in it, although I think the big translation that the academia looks forward to always is the Schneemelker, and it's translated from the German, Schneemelker and Henneke's New Testament Apocrypha. That's supposed to be sort of the top of them all. But in any event, there are several translations, including a very poetic 19th century by the great theosophist and Madame Blavatsky's friend G.R.S. Mead. So if you wish to avail yourself of the text, you certainly can do so. Now, what we were trying to do on the previous two occasions was really to create a framework, the setting for this work, which one should always repeat is also part of the Acts of Thomas, as they are called. And to a little bit recollect that theme, the legend has it, which is believed by certainly by the Christians in India, that St. Thomas the Apostle came to India, that he ran afoul of one of the local rulers, of whom there were many, and that as the result of that he was thrown into prison, and while in the prison he yielded to the entreaties of the prisoners, who were, as prisoners usually are, unhappy and also bored, to tell, and you are a holy man, you know wonderful stories, tell us a story. And then he told the scripture, which sometimes is called the Hymn of the Pearl, and sometimes by other names, the Hymn of the Robe of Glory being probably the second most popular. Up to now, I did not engage in any detailed interpretation of the text, because I wanted to create the overall atmosphere, the cosmological framework within which the story of the Hymn of the Pearl fits. But let me say that this time, if you don't mind, I'm going to experiment a little with this. I am going to use more notes, because some years ago I wrote an essay of considerable length that was never published, and that's strange with me, because I'm one of these writers who, if I write something, I want it published. Well, this one I didn't go after it, but let us say, I wrote a fairly long essay which contains a pretty detailed interpretation of the Hymn of the Pearl. The reason for it being, which is also a term that I mentioned before, namely that I do consider the Hymn of the Pearl or the Hymn of the Glory as being in the nature of a statement of the Gnostic monomyth. A monomyth is a myth that contains all the other myths. And of course, we need to keep in mind that, and I always like to quote him, first of all, because he was an authority, and secondly, he was also a very nice man, whom we knew, that Professor Gilles Quispel of Holland said that the way the Gnostic literature came about is that first there is always experience. Somebody experiences something extraordinary. Somebody has a flash or several flashes of gnosis, and then this then in turn eventually is put into the form of a myth. A mythos really is one word, one Greek word for a story. In other words, in order to communicate the essence of an experience over Gnostic, over transcendental nature, the best, the most effective way of accomplishing that communication is by putting it into a story. This, of course, is also a fairly popular custom, especially in the Mediterranean, the Middle Eastern milieu, wherein, as somebody told me once, that whenever you have a conversation with somebody in Arabia, in Turkey, and Morocco, any of those places, and if it is especially if it is concerning a profound subject, then your conversationalist almost inevitably, after a few sentences, will say, well, sir, let me tell you a story. And because it is the literary genre whereby mysterious and mystical and Gnostic subjects are conveyed, and the best way to convey them. So obviously we are faced here with something of that sort. It is a story that is very poetically put together, and that has its applications, has its modalities of interpretation on several levels, which is often the case, because we need to keep in mind that the ancient peoples of the Mediterranean, but also of other places, I would say it could be applied to the mythology of India, to think like the great Hindu poems, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, that they have not only a single interpretation, but that they have parallel interpretations of a similar meaning on separate levels. For instance, and just since I mentioned it, the Ramayana, which is a story of the god Rama and of his desperate love affair with his betrothed Radha, who has been abducted and taken to an island, which is probably the island now known as Sri Lanka or Ceylon, and then Rama, who is a prince and a god, has to organize a great big campaign to go and free Radha. Am I making a mistake? No. All right. So, and again, like these great myths many of them are beautifully translated and very, very enjoyably written by the late German scholar Heinrich Zimmer in a book called Philosophies of India. They're really less philosophies, but they are the myths. For the one that I always remember with some glee is that here's the island, and Rama wants to get over there, obviously, with his troops. And they don't have enough boats. I think that's the issue. So what happens is that he commands a whole bunch of little animals, some kind of little rodents, which can swim in the water as well as run. And these rodents make a living bridge from the mainland of India to the island. And then on this bridge, the troops can march to the island and free his lady friend. So again, indicating that since he's a god, he can command the forces and the beings of nature and get them to help him. So it's full of delightful stories of this sort. And so is the Mahabharata, of the great Bharata war. Now, a story has advantages over mere prosaic accounts. Why? Because it's easier to remember. It calls to something that is so important in our lives, and we don't pay enough attention to it. And I think it still goes under the name of imagination. It is an ancient term and an ancient custom. I know that it was already used and entered the theological literature in the West by way of Albertus Magnus, Saint Albert the Great, who was Archbishop of Regensburg in Germany, and one of the great early church fathers and doctors of the church, as they call them, you know, the saints who made, let's say, a didactic contribution to church doctrine, so that they may be considered teachers of the church, called the doctors of the church. And by now we also have quite a few women. I think one of the first one was the great and wonderful Saint Teresa of Avila, and then many others, so that they are teachers. And so in this respect, the great, it was Albertus Magnus who said that one of the most effective ways of teaching profound spiritual things is by way of a story. And that the story, the myth, is of very, very great importance. And it is such because it calls to what in Latin we call the imaginatio, the imagination, which in turn, if you want to look at it more technically, is the turning of words and concepts and precepts into images. Images that will be remembered. Why do you suppose people are so assiduous nowadays, very often to excess, by taking photographs? You've got to photograph everything. And we had one character, well, we always had a lot of characters, but we had one character who used to come to our previous location in Atwater Village. And this gentleman had these several little cameras with him, and he went around the premises and took a picture of everything. Every chair, every picture, every candlestick, every pot in the kitchen. And I just somehow, I didn't have the heart to put cold water on his project and say, and what are you going to do with all of this stuff, mister? But there you are. So, and of course, we need to keep in mind that the image, we still have the word in English, from which is created or enriched and completed by the imaginatio, by the imagination, the image-making faculty of our psyche is a very important thing. And so that psychological fact, let us say, is very closely involved with the sort of thing that we are dealing with in the Hymn of the Pearl, because by being stimulated in our imagination, we conjure up pictorially in our minds, in the little movie camera inside of our head, the content of the story. And I think you will agree with me that it is a lot easier to remember pictures, especially if the pictures are meaningful pictures, than words or ideas. And so that is what we are dealing with here. It's very important to keep that in mind, and also it has a great deal to do with recall. If any of you should have the misfortune or the fortune to get to be of a very advanced age like I am, then you will recall perhaps the idea that a time comes when you will remember images. You will remember what your friends look like 50 years ago or something like that. But you may not remember their names. You may not remember where in heck you met them or anything else about them. But certainly that. So the image making is very important. And so we have that kind of imaginative and yet at the same time informative content in something like the Hymn of the Pearl. Now, information is different from image making, but we need to remember they are all there, because the images evoke ideas, and these ideas in turn constellate themselves into concepts. And by them you get a more and more complete picture of what the author may have wished to convey. Hans Jonas, whom I regard highly, not only because he taught for a while, but he left, I think, about a very short time before I got there. I guess they wanted to make room for me to come to the University of Innsbruck. He taught at the University of Innsbruck, and he himself was a well-known disciple of Martin Heidegger of the existentialist school, which at that time was going great guns. And you had all kinds of choice of existentialist philosophers, from the real nice ones to the rather obnoxious ones, like Jean-Paul Sartre. I never considered him anything else but an obnoxious individual. And I was talking to a very nice French lady in Innsbruck once. I think she was with the occasion, and I mentioned that, and he said, il est un sale homme. He's a dirty man. And in French, you call somebody dirty is about the worst thing that you can call them. It's really true. Sal is a very bad word. Well, she probably knew him and I didn't, so she must have been right. See, in any event, Jonas was a very remarkable teacher, and he had in addition to be a good scholar, he also had a good aesthetic sense, which comes out in his works. And so in his normative work, the old copy of which I have here, the Gnostic religion, he writes about the hymn of the pearl, and I think this is worth recalling. And this is what here, just a paragraph. The immediate charm of this tale is such that it affects the reader prior to all analysis of meaning. You see, this is a little bit of a magic. That is the magic of good writing. That you don't have to call on the logician in your head to figure it out, but it strikes you right there. The effect is immediate. So it is such that it affects the reader prior to all analysis of meaning. The mystery of its message speaks with its own force, which almost seems to dispense with the need for detailed interpretation. Well, Professor Jonas, that's a good way to try to wiggle out from having to interpret the story. But in any event, perhaps nowhere else is the basic Gnostic experience expressed in terms more moving and more simple. Well, at least there he gives a very straight statement. Now, so then, if you permit me today, experimentally, that's all right. We can put something. We can put a water glass on top of it. That'll hold it. So that I will refer a little more often to my notes than I usually do, owing to the fact that perhaps my imagination and my recall were a little bit more acute all the years ago when I wrote this. So still, I think we need to engage in interpretation, but in as rich a one as possible. Now we may perhaps begin what could be our interpretation of this remarkable text or poem, which we may repeat now has at times been called the hymn of the pearl, at other times the hymn of the robe of glory, and even by other names. So the story is truly timeless, and both eternally recurring and perpetually relevant. These characteristics, if they are correct, would indicate that we are dealing with a document that is not bound to any historical period, not bound even to any systematic philosophical system, but really bound onto itself. It's something that stands in itself and that is capable of exercising on the reader or reciter a certain kind of impressions and certain kind of influences. So it's, and as I mentioned before, like all great myths, its application is multitudinous. And just for our quick information, the two great components of multitudinous interpretation, not only of this myth, but of spiritual things in general. The two are that they apply to the divine and that they apply to the human. Yes, you can find the story in transcendental and celestial mythology, in creation myths, in various poetic statements that relate to the other side of things, but nolens volens, as we say in Latin, which means that whether we want to or not, in our language, whether we want to, it also can be found inside of ourselves. And the reason that it appeals to us, not only this one, but any great myth, is because, yes, while it may be a story that is put in a form that is obviously outside of ourselves, I mean, it's been a long, long time, if he ever really walked the face of the earth, that King Arthur did his exploits in the British Isles or elsewhere. I've only seen one statue of him, but my acquaintance with England is not very great. It's pretty much confined to London. I really love London. But anyway, I've only seen one statue of King Arthur, and that was in the famous round chapel of the palace, the imperial palace in Innsbruck, the Tyrol, Austria, which was a palace of the emperors when they couldn't stand Vienna anymore and wanted to go someplace else, wanted to see the mountains, which you can see in Innsbruck very nicely. And there, one of the first emperors who lived there, Emperor Maximilian I, who often is called the last knight, not a dark knight, but a knight in armor, And there is the catafalque in bronze, black bronze, of Maximilian I, and around it, in a circle, stand a large number of statues, all dark, made out of dark bronze, and underneath it is usually an inscription as to who they depict. And I went around the circle looking at all of them, and there was Arturus, Rex quondam futurus, Arthur, the once and future king. I said, aha, there he is. That's what he looked like, or at least the sculptor felt that that's what he looked like, But so we, once again, the imagination and the... see, that is an image that all these many years, because I was about 17 when I first saw that, all these many years, I said, Arthur the king. I close my eyes and I can see the black statue in Innsbruck. Why? Because the image stuck with me, and it mingled with my own images. And this has a great deal to do with memory and with good images. So let us say now, there are, as I indicated, there are obviously ways of interpreting these various myths. That, I say, the two main ones that you should look for is their interpretation as a story, as a tale, whatever you wish to call it, fairy tale or mythical tale, and the other one as a story, a tale within yourself. And if you can come up with some good interpretation of both of those, then you have done a very, very good job. I used to make jokes in school, for instance, about history, that if you study history the way it should be studied, then it's not going to be anymore his story, but it will be your story. Because, of course, the mythic element will make a connection with your psyche and the story. So this is what we need to keep in mind here also. Now, as we may begin our interpretation of this remarkable story and poem, which we may repeat, has at times been called, as I said, Hymn of the Pearl or Hymn of the Robe of Glory. The story is truly timeless and both eternally recurring and perpetually relevant. This is the hallmark of a good story or a good myth. Whether like many of us, when children had been nourished on fairy tales, stories, having been bilingual in my childhood, both Hungarian and German, I was nourished in part on the Grimm literature of the brothers Grimm, who are grim indeed. Which are actually, doggone guys wrote some pretty good stories. But you have to keep in mind that one of their intentions, which unfortunately is all too clearly impressed on you, is that they want to teach, they want to influence, they want to train little children. They want to show through their stories to the little children how to be good boys and girls, and that if they are not good boys and girls by the author's definition, then, bad things may happen to them, as they often do by the Brothers Grimm. But in any event, the didactic and very Germanic interpretation of the Brothers Grimm is, of course, somewhat grim in nature, and it is at a lower level. It's not at the level where the spiritual, the insightful, and the intuitive come very much into their own, but where the intention is something else, namely to make the children behave well, which is perhaps a worthy objective, but one gets kind of tired of it, especially when you are the child upon whom it is inflicted. Speaking of children, that is, of course, how the Hymn of the Pearl begins. And I will just read this one little verse. When I was a little child and dwelt in my kingdom, the house of my father, and enjoyed the wealth and the glories of those who brought me up, from the east, our homeland, my parents provisioned and sent me forth. So he starts with the point of departure and indicates that by our standards he was a child and that he was given instructions for some journey that would take him into the distance. So we might say that depending on which level we look at, but on the, how should we put it, on the top of the pyramid, if we want to visualize it as a pyramid, I often do, all the other images come to mind, of universal being, way up there in the east, as the poem says it, because the east, in terms of directions, has always been the the place from whence good things come, because it is in the east that the sun rises. That is the birthplace of the light. And so in the birthplace of the light, in the kingdom of the light, he was a child and was being instructed. So we need to keep in mind that unlike in the monotheistic faith, which we have become accustomed to, Judaism, Christianity and Islam primarily, which at least officially make a sharp distinction between God and the human spirit or soul, the Gnostic view from the beginning always recognized not only a creator versus a creature relationship, but an underlying identity. So he is the child. Child of whom? Child of the divine. And if we want to be very precise about it and apply it sort of to maybe our own circumstances, then what we can do is imply that we are indeed, as that mysterious sentence has declared that we all have, we are indeed in a relationship to the ultimate reality that is in some respects like the relationship of a child to its parents. As the child comes from the parents in terms of his physical body and various other things, including probably his psychological nature, so we also come forth a great transcendental mystery. We come from a mystery which is of very great importance, of very great power, of very great wisdom, and of also very deep and important feelings. None of those should be let's say, neglected. So this is the issue of the child. But there is also another that perhaps is a little less readily comprehended, and that is that the child carries, to some extent and degree, even in the physical nature, a child carries the nature of the parents. That's why when people still like to have children, they say, well, that's one of the primary motivations, because something of, I never had any, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But that's nothing new. That's nothing new. But let us say the parents knowingly or unknowingly, consciously, semi-consciously expect that their nature, their character, their psyche would in some way continue in their children. And that is really let's say, the essence of family lineages or so forth, that you say, well, there were the ancestors, but look, there is the family tree, we had them at home, but if you look, it goes on and on, because it comes from the same source. So that this is, of course, a distinguishing mark, let us say, of the gnosis, in whatever form it may appear, that rather than being a manufactured, a made creature of God, the human is closely related to the divine. That the human is a child of the divine and not something that the divine made. Because you see, this is where the Gnostics said, well, monotheistic God, like propounded in Judaism, and then of course also in other places later on, totally monotheistic. The monotheistic God is a craftsman. He makes things. He makes the world, and he makes people, and so forth. He's like a carpenter who has a little hammer and puts things together, like the old Calypso about Noah was an old man, and he stumbled all around in the dark, and he picked himself a little hammer, and he built himself a little ark. And along there came the animals. They were walking 2 by 2. There was a donkey and a lion and a king kangaroo. But I think my performance shall stop at this point. But it's that sort of thing that the creator is a maker, while in the esoteric view, which we find really in the deeper statements of all the great traditions, in the esoteric view, the divine somehow, at least in part, becomes its creation. The divine pours itself out like a fountain of water or some liquid, and this outpouring becomes the multiplicity of worlds. I think a place that a graphic depiction or diagram that is a very good symbolization of that is the tree of life of the Kabbalah, because that's what it is. The source is above in Keter, coming from the Ein Sof Ur, and then it pours out through the 10 vessels and the connecting pathways, and becomes a structure. Since I'm not a demiurge, and I don't know how to build things, I never did anything about it, but I had an idea, the idea I still have, was to construct or have constructed a fountain which would be built like the tree of life of the Kabbalah, and the water, whatever liquid would come in on the top, and then there would be 10 basins, and after it fills up the first basin, then it pours down to the next one, and the next one, and the next one to the 10th. Would have been a heck of a good idea, but it remained at the level of idea. So I'm afraid. However, if you want to undertake some amateur building, you might want to have a go at it. In any event, I don't know how I got to that, but I somehow did. In any event, the symbolism of the child that comes forth from its parents is a wonderful metaphor. Probably its wonderfulness is rooted in the fact that deeply within ourselves, perhaps in the very cells of our body and in the various portions of our psyche, we know that it is true. We know that not all of us, but that we have come forth from a source. And that this source may be called the divine parent, may be called all kinds of names, but it is the fons et origo, as in Latin it will be called, the fountain and the origin of our being. That being comes from being. Being doesn't come from non-being. And that's a great trouble with the materialistic, rationalistic world image that we pretty much live in, because if indeed we live in a universe that has its own, as already Isaac Newton pretty well discovered, that has its own mechanism, that has its own logic, that has its own ways of being, its own lawfulness, then we may wish to consider that lawfulness and these qualities in turn come from a source of ultimate lawfulness, that being comes from more being and not from non-being. But I'm afraid that that's a little bit too philosophical, and these materialistic professors in our schools and teachers don't really relate to that, don't really understand that. But it's very, very important. So when I think one of the great questions of life, which it is incumbent upon us to answer, if we have lived a life of the seeking of meaning and of understanding, is where do we come from? Where do we come from? Do we just come from the cells? No, part of us does, but not all of us. And so we may, and we can. I have even known little children to engage in thinking very much of this sort. I know how to think. I know how to imagine. I know how to come to certain conclusions in my mind. And that indicates that I come from a condition which is affinitized to that. That if I can think, I come from somewhere where thinking is done, and it's still in me. That if I can love, similarly, which certainly shouldn't be forgotten, I come from a place where there is love and affection, and that is why I'm able to evoke that into my nature and to do something with me. So where we come from is in us. And so it is with when I was just a little child. His parents are the heavenly parents, are the great living symbolizations of the eternal and everlasting. That was that I was just a little child. So that we are children of a greatness. We are children of something, or somebody, or somebodies, whichever way you want to cut it. That is very great, that is very important, and that we need to remember. The Spanish have a nice word for somebody who is an important person. Hijo de algo. He is the son of somebody. He is not a son of nobody. It's valuable. But you see, in a world where we don't have any respect for the parents anymore, not for parenthood either, with all this stuff that is going on, and things, it's difficult to relate to that. But the fact of the matter is that if we are something or somebody, even though maybe little, even maybe uninstructed, just stupid little children, but we are still children of somebody. And ultimately that somebody is the eternal thing, is the eternal one, the good, the great, the wise. That's where we come from, and that's why if we have any sense, we can manifest goodness and wisdom in our own lives, because in a mysterious way, in a spiritual way, no doubt, we have inherited it. We have inherited goodness. We have inherited wisdom. And if we call upon it with sufficient dedication, we can bring it forth from within ourselves. And that's the kind of child that he's talking about. So about the recognition of this relationship, much depends. If we acknowledge whose children we really are, then we are on our way to Gnosis. When we have acknowledged our connection with something, and this is of extremely great importance, because that connection is, we can have all kinds of metaphors for it. That connection is the finger of God. It's the hand of God. If we, I am not alone. I'm connected to something. I'm connected to something great, something wise. And you can introduce various details. The ancients would have said, I am the child of the one who put the sun and the moon and the stars into the heaven and keeps them there. Nobody will say, oh no, my astronomy professor said so-and-so. You know what? I don't give a tinker's damn about your astronomy professor. The symbolic interpretation will do something for me. It will inspire me. It will be good for me. The materialistic interpretation will do something to me. It will make me another materialist, a species of whom there are far too many in the world already. And at least I wish that number would diminish. In any event, so you see, and so the child, the spirit, dwells in its own kingdom, and kingdom, it's probably because at one time people were still more likely, more inclined to have kings like the British do, thank God, and so forth. So a political unit where people live, the country or a continent, whatever, was referred to as the kingdom. But it really means a realm. I mean, the word realm, as you can tell, I have a thing about words. But now I'm getting too old to remember them, so that's a real problem. And in any event, the realm comes from the Latin regnum, which means the kingdom, and everything comes from rex, the king. So that is the realm of the king. So upon this recognition of our relationship to something greater, and in that something greater, not just mechanical, physical or astronomical forces, but real consciousness. The reason that we have consciousness, maybe not as much as we would like, but still, the reason that we have consciousness is that we come from consciousness, that we have brought with us a little bit of that consciousness. It's like one of the more ancient and to me sort of most meaningful metaphors for this is the flame and the spark. Like in Madame Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, there is a poem which is really worth studying. Beautiful, It starts. It describes the eternal being as the eternal parent, the eternal wrapped in her ever invisible robes. The eternal parent came forth, and then things start. Then after a while, after millions and millions of years, the eternal parent gets tired of it all, I think, and wraps herself once again in her ever invisible robes, and then you can't see her anymore. But it's, in other words, it is it's a metaphor for a creative reality, and this is the creative reality that is implicit and also explicit in the notion that our protagonist was just a little child. And so where was he? In my kingdom, the house of my father. Well, you say, well, this is too material a metaphor, a house, We all rather be in a house than in an apartment, although some of us can't afford it. So that also has to be kept in mind. But in the house of his father, in my kingdom, the house of my father. But what also is implied there, I think, very powerfully, is not the house of the world, not even the house of nature, not of the body, and certainly not of human society. Certainly not the boys in Washington, D.C. and in Sacramento, California. Not that house. Let them play house over there and leave us alone if it could be done. But this is the trouble with governments, has always been that they won't leave you alone. That's their nature. They won't leave you alone. So it's an ongoing difficulty. Governments are an ongoing problem. In any event, he was in the kingdom and the house of his father. So the danger of much of current scientism, which is probably the best thing to call it, because scientism is not science. Scientism is a religion that you made out of science. And that's probably something that shouldn't be done. In any event, like we are in this world, we are in this nature, whatever, we are in this city, we are in this country, of course we are. But that doesn't mean that this place is not our parent, is not our mother. It is a locale where we find ourselves. And this is very important. We are really in our nature not subjects of external things, of external forces, of other people, of governments or things of that sort. No, because in us is what has been called, it's a very nice term, I have seen it in some books, the royal self. I have a book that a very fine gentleman who was both a Jungian analyst and a Shakespearean scholar here in town wrote, and it's entitled Shakespeare's Royal Self. So he says that's it. We have a royal self, not just any kind of a self. But you see there again, there are too many people around, and many of them wiggle themselves into important positions who don't want us to belong to ourselves, who want to convince us that they are our masters. And that there is a problem with that. So, and the danger, even much of the current well, it's no longer just naturalism. Kind of in the 60s, there was a lot of nature and Gaia and all that sort of thing. You know, when people say Gaia, I always thought that they were talking Jewish and they meant a Goya, Goyim, you know, but no, that's not it. But now it's really more than that, because I think we have progressed now even away from nature into the worship of a mechanistic universe. It's not that much different, except in detail, from the universe of Isaac Newton. You know, Isaac Newton's universe has been described, I don't know whether by him, but by others, as a clockwork universe. Tick, 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 there it goes around, you know. But the problem is that a clockwork universe will not respond to you. A clockwork universe will not find and give you a response to what is inside of you. A clockwork universe is dead. Yet, we are not dead. We are not dead primarily because inside of us is a mysterious life. Not just a physical life, not just the physical cells that are jumping around, but a life beyond external being. And that is extremely important. So let's say, and I will include somewhat in it the evolutionary flapdoodle. And there I usually irritate my fellow theosophists and so forth, you know. I am not really one of the evangelists on Sunday evening who all are over there and they're preaching against evolution, and they always pronounce it evolution. See? So no, I don't think so. But the only thing is that I don't think that the evolutionary principle is as all-pervasive and as all-important as people made it to be. Yes, there are developments of various kinds, biological, zoological, plant developments and so forth. But do these developments really go anywhere? Really? Yeah. If we had the vision to see to their end, if indeed they have an end, where have they gone? So, you know, be a little bit careful. Evolution, if I may use a vernacular from another part of the country, and evolution ain't it. But evolution was a big deal some time ago. In the wake of Charles Darwin in the 19th century, early 20th, it was a big deal. So I think it's more important for us to keep in mind that there is a divine life. There is a transcendental energy that is alive. But as to it evolving anywhere, I don't know about that. Because time and again in our days too, they find creatures that have not evolved for millions of years. They're sitting there in the bottom of the ocean or various other places. And if you pick them up, they'll say to you in some fashion, I ain't evolving. You know, I'm just here. What the heck? I ain't evolving. So I have heard them. You know, this is my kind of clairaudience. So that those things have to be kept in mind. So and certainly this place where we find ourselves, this place is not our mother or our father. for that matter. I think that Bhagavad Gita, which has one beautiful English poetic translation by Sir Edwin Arnold called the Song Celestial, has a beautiful verse that says, "Never the spirit was born, the spirit shall cease to be never. Never was time it was not, end and beginning are dreams. Birthless and deathless and changeless remaineth the spirit forever. Death hath not touched it at all, dead though the house of it seems." Don't you remember? "Lo, but as one lay at once, wore not robes away, and taking new ones saith, this will I wear today. So putteth by the Spirit lightly its garb of flesh, and passeth to inherit a residence of flesh." That's nice stuff. It really is nice stuff. So, thank you. So the Sufis, some of the Sufis of the Islamic world called each other, so I read, when they met each other, they were just, whoever they were, tradesmen and camel drivers or whatnot, but when they met each other on the street and they knew of their allegiance, they would salute each other as kings, because they saluted the royal divine spirit in each other. Yeah, that's, when you have that kind of attitude, then you got something. Yes. You really do. You don't have that attitude, then you haven't got much. But now, yes, well, you're really you're an electronic device that is buying other electronic devices and trying to use them. There's nothing electronic about us. We are what we are. We are because inside of us, deeply within us, there is something that has been called by the philosophers, by some of the philosophers, the holy other. It is not of here. Das ganz andere in German. It's completely different. But it is there. And it functions, the holy other. If you have that even as a concept, then you can reflect, well, if it is not like everything else, then what is it like? And then your exploration begins. And that exploration can take psychological paths, it can take philosophical paths, it can take religious paths, but it really asks the question, who am I? And that question is answered already. I am the child who started in his father's house. Now then, and not the house of the world, not the house of nature, not the house of the body, not the house of society. And this needs to be kept in mind. So we are all noble personages by virtue of our very being. We are, as I use the Spanish word, hijo de algo, and probably the same for the daughter. We are children of somebody, and that somebody is the Most High. So life is neither a meritocracy, where if you do a lot of stuff, you are going to be regarded highly, nor a slave market, but it is a field of activity for noble heroes. And this is an important issue. The ancients, beginning with the Greeks as far as I know, but then there were other people before the Greeks, so they must have got a lot of it from somewhere else too. They had a category of being, which they called the hero. And of course the Romans inherited that. And the hero is someone who is able to exercise the virtues of his soul, the good, the true, the beautiful, the ineffable greatness to an optimal degree. And by cultivating these great and important qualities, the ordinary human becomes a hero. And then, of course, there are other stages of progression. You know who the equivalent, maybe not exact, there are never exact equivalents. If you try to compare two ants with each other, you will find that even they are different from each other. But maybe an approximation is the fact that we are, in subsequent ages, who became the hero? Who are the heroes? Well, by knighthood perhaps, but before that, what is the equivalent in the spiritual sense of the heroes of the ancients, of the pagans? The saints. Yeah. The saints. Because the saint is somewhat, by theological definition, who has lived, expressed the virtue of his soul to an optimal degree, who has cultivated the ineffable greatness within him, and thereby had joined the greater kingdom. And as it's very important. But you know, the trouble is that when you have a culture that doesn't concern saints anymore, you will also have a culture that has no heroes, that does not have any heroes, and does not respect heroes. And that is why people don't join the armed forces anymore, and various other things, because the mythos of heroism is going out of our culture. It's being beaten out of us. Now, once again, I don't mean that we have to walk around all the time with a great big sword or something. It would be fun, you know. I have a tiny little sort of knife-like sword in the drawer there, but I always liked swords. They're a great thing, they're a great symbol. But it doesn't mean that we are here imitating King Arthur and the people at the round table. But it means that we have to be able to cultivate within ourselves the seeds of greatness that are within us to an optimal degree. And that can be done, you know. You can cultivate Dummkopf within you, as we would call it in German, which just means stupid head. And then that's what we will be, you know. Dumm is dumb, you know. Kopf is head, stupid head. You know, we can cultivate all kinds of silly things, you know. But if we cultivate, now I know that this is going to annoy some of the ladies. Certainly feminists, it does annoy that. But it's my obsession with words. Virtus, virtue, comes from vir, which is a man, a male. Because it was regarded the strength and the capacity that is in your father, people like that. So it shouldn't be taken too literally, but it means the virtus, the human, the excellence of human nature. Human nature can be debased, can be nasty, can be evil, and certainly can be, and almost always is to some degree, stupid, as I just mentioned. But human nature can be exalted. In human nature there is a greatness, and when that greatness is cultivated and recognized and given the necessary attention, then you really are on the way of developing into a real human being. This is important. So I don't know what associations you have with the word virtuous, but let us say a soul strength that we can call on. And it is this soul strength that has motivated the martyrs. I'm just reading the memoirs of a great hero of my native people, Joseph Cardinal Vincenti, and no matter how they tormented that man, the heroic nature was there. So you see, when we call upon the strongest, the deepest, the noblest within ourselves, then we become heroes. And it doesn't have to be, doesn't have to manifest in acts of human heroism, but that is why we say, all right, is the heroic act that the child is asked to perform in the Hymn of the Pearl, is that heroic act a physical one or a spiritual one? Well, I would say that the greatest likelihood, owing to the context of the story, that it is a spiritual one. See, this is the difference, for instance, between a lot of the legendary, as beautiful and meaningful as it often is, of knighthood in the West. King Arthur and his knights and so on and so forth, on the one hand, and sing something like the Hymn of the Pearl, that it is not the physical, just the physical endurance and the physical courage that matters, but something else. Something that is called upon, that is deeply within, and that is the heroic soul. This is the heroic spirit, which is really unconquerable, and which ultimately, as the Greeks would have said, joins the kingdom of the gods. Because the succession, or maybe that's not the right word, the movement of transformation from ordinary human to the gods and the goddesses was, first the human becomes a hero, then the hero becomes a demigod, a demigoddess, and then becomes a full-fledged god or goddess, which I don't know whether any of those can be regarded from our point of view as an enviable fate, but I think it is. One of the proofs was that, which also is sort of one of the most beautiful images, that when in old Greece the people were walking around below the mountains and up there enshrouded in the clouds is Mount Olympus, and if they listen very carefully and if the air is clear, what do they hear? Well, if that had been in Christian times, they would have heard the singing of hymns or something like that. But no, what they hear is laughter. The gods laugh. The gods are happy, and they laugh. And with their laughter, they teach humans, look, you guys and gals, you also can be happy like us. You also can laugh. But you have to go through the steps. You have to become gods. You have to be here with us on Mount Olympus. And then it will be a happy condition. Quite important, quite important. And if you look into the majority of polytheistic cultures, if there are still a few around, like the Hindus and so forth, they're too. If you really look at those gods, there is a contentment about them. Now, I know a Hindu gentleman, theosophist in Miami, Mr. Ram Kumar Singh from the Punjab. And with all of that, he's still very traditional. So in his beautiful house, where all the walls and the floors are covered with marble. And they said, oh, and Mr. Singh, you have all this marble. Oh, he said, this marble is very, very helpful because it's easy to keep clean and it is easy to keep cool. And don't you want your house to be like that? I said, yes, Mr. Singer, that's wonderful. But there in one of the rooms, pretty big room, all along the walls stand the statues of the gods, each one about this big. And in front of them are offerings and so forth. And the little lights are burning. And also he said, Dr. Hoeller, it is very important to keep the traditions. And he said, this is my tradition. And if it keeps me alive, if I keep my tradition alive, it keeps me alive. It's very true, because these are they are symbolizations of spiritual realities, and when you respect those, you're automatically respecting the spiritual reality within yourself. So now let's see, we go a little bit further, because otherwise I have given the entire lecture only on a couple of lines. And maybe that is not all that good. So let's see. Now our poem goes on. And from the wealth of our treasury, they had already bound for me a load. Or the other translation which I like is they made for me a bundle. And so here I can see the hero of the hymn of the pearl having this bundle behind his back as he goes forth on his journey. But no, for me a load. Great it was, but so light that I could carry it alone. Gold from Beth El and silver from the great Gazak, and chalcedonies of India, and opals from the realm of Kushan, and they guided me. Now, from this, I can't read my own handwriting. That becomes a problem, And they girded me with adamant, which can crush iron. Now, what is this? Well, like all of it, it is very good symbolism. Provisions for the journey. We are given what it takes to prevail on the journey. So let's say if we feel despondent, as we all do from time to time, if we feel powerless, which is of course an affliction of the human race, and that works both for good and for evil, because by seeking power, people commit a lot of evil deeds. You don't even have to think of the top evils, but think of a Hitler. He was pretty much think of a Stalin. What is it? Power. So that these things have to be kept in mind. But this is not what is meant here. There is, let's see, we are by our nature, by our inheritance. I come from a culture where people still inherited something. Now they inherit cell phones. Big deal. But let's say, we inherited land, nice little forests with animals in it, all that sort of thing. But of course, in come the boys with the red flags and with the hammer and sickle and take it away from you if you inherit something. But in any event, we are given resources when we are sent forth on the journey. And the journey, of course, right now being this world. I don't know whether any of us have journeyed or will journey. I don't know, on Mars or on Venus or on the Milky Way or whatever the case may be. That's something else again. But the journey for the accomplishment of our spiritual tasks. And for that task, we are equipped. We have what it takes. But we have to know how to call on it. And I'm sorry to say, I'm not really sorry to say, I'm happy to say that those resources will not come to you out of the screen of a computer or any of this other stuff. Well, information, pure, yes. I still think that I was much happier when I was young, when I could go into a beautiful library like we had in Austria and so forth, or the library of the Benedictine convent in Salzburg, which must still be there. Just to look at the room and at the books will make you happy. But any event, I was happier when you could look up information in a library and not on a screen. Screens are all right for movie. You know, screens are all right for Marilyn Monroe, especially somebody like that. You know, but you're not going to gain wisdom from screens. Maybe some quotation that you want to copy down, sure, but on the whole, that is not really where it is. But we have been given provisions. We have deeply within us, we have what it takes. And it manifests in various ways. Now, I had the misfortune, because it was a misfortune, I had the misfortune to be in the middle of a terrible war as a 13-year-old civilian, and in the front line, in the actual front line for something like 2.5 months. Well, let me tell you, I don't wish that on my worst enemy. My worst enemy was coming. but you know, it is, you can find yourself in this life in situations that are extremely demanding, that are extremely stressful in one way or the other. Other people, you don't have to be in a war. This whole world is a war. You want to know what a world war is? It's all this. It's not as bad as the other one, and not in the same way, but it's still bad. So it is very important for us to first of all, be aware that we have resources. It may not appear that way. We may appear weak. We may appear frightened. We may appear intimidated, all kinds of things. But if you go deeper and deeper, then you will discover that there is something there that is not of that kind. Something there that makes you strong. Something there that makes you wise. Something there that makes you kind. But you have to get to it. And I freely admit that it's certainly not easy, and that even as a non-Algerian, I am still fighting the obstacles in order to get to it at various times. But it is there. It is there. So that's what is for the provisions that are given him for his journey, which will allow him to complete his journey. So we carry a spiritual treasure, And indeed, we might say we are a spiritual treasure. If you want to be sort of romantic about it, you can say we are the jewels in the crown of our great eternal parents, and they send us down into the other world. As long as we know, as long as we have a tiny bit of contact, a tiny bit of gnosis, then we have treasures beyond all measure. Only when self-knowledge goes away does poverty set in. The only poor person, real poor person, is somebody who doesn't know and who won't know. And I don't mean no data, but know something else. The real poverty is the poverty of not knowing what is worth knowing, what needs to be known. If you, I think in the Gospel of Thomas, the Savior says, if you know not yourself, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. So you want to fight poverty? You want to make people richer? Feed them gnosis. So then, and of course many other statements. This is now New Testament. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. For where your treasure is, there will be your heart also. What is the treasure? What you value? It's not something that you can take to the bank. So our values, our spiritual treasures, then are important, and they belong into us, into our heart. So we go forth on the journey, each and every one of us, with a treasure, as the poem says, some of which we maybe lose later, or more to the point, we forget that we have it. Not only treasure, but protection. The belt of adamant that the poem writes about, which can crush iron. This, of course, is a defense. We have good protection, but we must use it. In order to use it, we must be aware of it. This does not mean arrogance and things of that sort. We have a spiritual treasure which, once again, it's not just a gift, it is a birthright. It comes with our nature, and maybe has very little to do with physical treasure. When we are in physicality, we are really, that is where we are now. We are sitting on physical chairs. We are in a physical building, which we are very happy to be able to occupy for our purposes. But when we are in physicality, then we are really in poverty. And the spiritual treasure is our birthright. It is ours. So when we are in physicality, here, we are not really in our place. I had the feeling almost from the time that I was born that I was not at home. Even though I was more at home physically than any other time. So When we are in physicality, we are not in our place. And therefore, illness, poverty, age, and all that befalls. The two are not the same. And we have to be aware of that. And as he goes forth, now I will conclude with this verse. And they took from me my bright robe, which in their love they had wrought for me, and my purple mantle, which was woven to the measure of my stature. So now there comes about not just a loss, but a denudation. We are all exiles from something absolutely great and marvelous. And because we are that, we have within us a little bit of the memory. You know? Light, boundless light, wonder, glory and love. We have experienced it. We know what it is. And if we do things right, we will re-experience it again. So we have been provisioned for the journey. And as such, robe, by the way, is a metaphor of the dignity of the person. So we need to remember that while we are being sent forth from our original place, we are not sent forth without provision, we are not sent forth without help, we are not sent forth without resources. Now, once again, we have to remember, however, that's just about the keynote of it, that these resources are spiritual resources. They are transcendental resources. They are divine resources. And if, contrary to what is really wise to do, we try to turn them into worldly resources, then we are doing the wrong thing. And this is the trouble with a lot of the people who, think and get rich. And my answer to that always has been, and then what? And somehow nobody was able to give me much of an answer. So the richest is of another kind. And yet, we also have to, I just throw that in and then it's really time for us to quit, that we may not realize that, but the resources, the transcendental resources, the great resources that we have, when the chips are down, to use that Las Vegas expression, when the chips are down, can also be very helpful, very supportive, even in the world. I don't want to go into details, but let us say I have seen and I have experienced the most miraculous help that can come to people from where? From the divine inside of them. And sometimes in the greatest danger, in the greatest peril, where let's say a bad ending is very, very likely, there it comes. A German poet, I think, Hölderlin, Johann Wilhelm Hölderlin, I think was his name, mystical poet, had one where he said that here I'm going to teach German to you. Nah ist und schwer zu fassen der Gott, wo aber Gefahr ist, da kommt das Rettende auch. Near but difficult to comprehend is the divine. But where there is danger, the saving power approaches. That is one of the greatest expressions of hope. If there is real trouble, it is a real danger, open yourself up and the help will come. Why? Because you are carrying the help on your shoulders. You have the resources with you. You have the bundle that they made for you so that you're not going to starve in the strange land. And moreover, the gifts that we have received in the beginning are real gifts. And there is no repayment for them. It's not the idea, no, you have to follow my commandment, otherwise I'm going to take my gifts away from you. No. So let's realize that indeed we come forth from a great mystery, we bring with us a great mystery, and we have the resources to prevail in a strange and mysterious and difficult and at times frustrating task. But we have the resources, and therefore we shall accomplish the task, as the child does in the story. The resources that we carry with us give us the assurance that we will make it, that we will prevail, and that then, having been the victors in the battle, we shall return to our parents' home in the light, be in the light, and from the light, and continue to embody and to express that light under all conditions. So let us keep that in mind. Yes, we are all sent forth, but we have the resources. Yes, these resources will work. We will receive the help right from within the gateway that is in our hearts and where the ultimate helper dwells. We will receive it, we will receive it, we will receive it. Thank you very much.